A lot of people are worried about something called the Great Reset. It was a proposal from the World Economic Forum that talked about things like you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Talked about renting your appliances and your furniture. Talked about people living in more tightly knit cities and not moving around as much. Today, I'm going to tell you some places where you can go if that's not the kind of life that you want to live, and if you're afraid that the place you live is going to get worse. Now, I've told you before that for me, I do not share as much concern about this as some other folks. I'm not saying that I don't have concerns about heavy-handed government, unelected bureaucrats. I've been talking about that with my family and now with you for a quarter of a century, long before many people were talking about it, that the Western countries in particular were heading in the wrong direction. That's why I left the United States, in part. That's why I gave up U.S. citizenship, in part. I didn't really want to be part of that system, and not for entirely the same reasons as this Great Reset, but I just saw things were going in the wrong direction. Been talking about it for almost my entire life. And yet, number one, I don't think we want to be miserable our entire lives. And what I'll tell you is from having spent a lot of time in over 100 countries around the world, having lived in quite a number of them, and having homes around the world, there is a difference between the world you live in your country and possibly the similar countries that you go on holiday to, and what else is out there. And so we're going to go through some of those what else is out there places today. And your first reaction might be, yeah, really, I'm going to go there? I'm a big believer in having plan Bs. If I can get second or third or fourth citizenship in another country that may be on the rise in the future, if I can move some money to certain countries, if I can do business in certain countries, I want to be diversified so that if something bad happens, I have as many options as possible. Because this idea of trying to, call which place is going to be great and which place isn't going to be great is as futile as trying to call, when's the top of the stock market so I can sell and buy in at the bottom. It's hard to call tops and bottoms. And so what you want is you want places where there's positive momentum. They may not be the best places now. They may not be places that you'd want to live now. But if you get access now, it's kind of like moving to Singapore in the 1970s. You wouldn't have done that. Look at the pictures of Singapore from the 1970s and then the 90s and 2000s and then now. If you don't have millions to invest in Singapore, you can't move there as an investor. Different story back in the 70s, even in the 80s, the 90s, even the 2000s. But eventually, it got too good. And they don't need people anymore. And so these are the places that you might want to get some kind of toehold in now. If you want to learn how to get toeholds into places, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We help our clients put together portfolios of second, third, fourth passports, residence permits, bank accounts, legal advice. We've got a network of experts, lawyers, estate agents, all kinds of professionals around the world that we work with to do everything under one roof. So the first place is the entire continent of Africa. Now, there's obviously about 54 countries in Africa, and you have some, obviously, the Coup Belt and kind of Western and basically Western Africa in the last couple of years has not been a good place to be. I'm primarily talking about Southern and Eastern Africa. And again, even in that region, not all the states are gems. You do have places like Kenya and Rwanda and Botswana and Namibia, which are some of the standouts. Mauritius and the Seychelles are standouts, not on continental Africa. So you've got a number of countries. And would you live in Rwanda? People who are there say it's very clean. Things run. There's always somebody, just like you see in El Salvador, Singapore, the UAE. Oh, it's a little heavy-handed. That's how you keep it so clean. You can't satisfy everybody. And I'm sure no place is perfect. But there are places in Africa, not the entire continent, but if you pick out some of the gems like the ones I've mentioned, Namibia has a residence program you can go in and you can be a part of. Mauritius has a residence program you can go and be a part of. Other countries are starting to come out with that. Egypt in North Africa has a citizenship program. Buy property, get a citizenship. And you might say, come on, it's less developed. Again, this is not necessarily your plan for tomorrow. This is a plan for you 10, 20 years from now. Because I think that when people start to get upset about stuff like a Great Reset, they start catastrophizing. And they act like it's happening tomorrow. Yes, some bad stuff has happened. Again, I've been here telling you for almost about 11 years now. Guys, worse and worse stuff is going to happen in the West. And you know what happened back in 2012 when I said some of this stuff? Not maybe exactly, but basically the general trend. Who's this crazy lunatic? He wants to go to Cambodia and Malaysia instead of the great fruited plain of the United States. Yeah, I don't regret it. Because you know how they treat me in Malaysia? A lot better than they treated me in the United States, I'll tell you that. And so you have places in Africa, there's less infrastructure, there's less enforcement, and there's also a culture of enforcement. If you want to get things done with the government, it can be extraordinarily bureaucratic. We had Jim Rogers speak at the last Nomad Capitalist Live. He rode a motorbike, all over the world, including through many African countries. So some of the hardest visas to get, some of the most pain in the butt. Some of those countries are trying to open that up. You're hearing about kind of regional corridors as Africa is trying to push out, especially Northern and Western Africa. They want to push out that Francophone influence. They want to get rid of France. I follow a lot of news from Africa, and people have a throw the bums out attitude towards the West. Look at places like South Africa. They are distinctly pro-Russia. Look at a lot of the countries that are now diplomatically working with China. They are saying, hey, China comes, they build us hospitals. The U.S. comes, they give us a lecture. You can agree or not agree. In their mind, they're doing what's best for their country. And heaven forbid, right? America first was supposed to mean America first for everybody? No, it's Rwanda first. And so I think the tide is turning away from the West. To some extent, I think that some of those countries were always very pro-Soviet Union, pro-Russia, and remain so to this day. But you may not agree with that, and that's fine. I may not agree with that, and that's fine. But if you want someplace different, they are trying to push away from the system that's in the West. And I don't think they want anybody lecturing. As they start to build a middle class in some of those countries, they don't want people coming and lecturing. Nomad Capitalist Live, our event, is in Malaysia again this year. And one of their former prime ministers basically gave out to the United States. And he said, you guys had the chance to develop. Now it's our turn. And now you guys want to put all your standards on us and stop us from developing because you polluted too much and you did too much of this and you did too much of that. Leave us alone. And I think that's kind of an additive that's happening from all the news that I read in Africa. So if you had a passport, you could live there in that particular country. I think the African Union, which is pretty much all the countries in Africa, is looking at slowly opening up to allow some sort of perhaps freedom of movement, some sort of easier travel. There could be greater opportunities. Now, you don't want to get some crazy African passport, but there are some, again, or even a residence permit you could get that would allow you to have a place to go. Mauritius is interesting with their real estate investment program. There's a possibility to get citizenship. It's tax-friendly. And hey, if you're concerned about other stuff happening in the world, it's pretty far away from where the fur is going to be flying. And so I think that there are some standouts on the continent of Africa and in the Indian Sea that could be interesting. Also in the South Pacific. I was in Vanuatu a number of years ago. This is, and I say this in the nicest of ways, one of the most disorganized places I have been to. Look at their citizenship program. I mean, that's kind of the citizenship of last resort. Now, Vanuatu's passport has lost visa-free access to the Schengen area of Europe, to the United Kingdom, and more recently to Ireland. It's not a great passport for traveling. Now, if you want a tax-free place where there's basically almost no taxes of any kind on anything, then having a Vanuatu passport would let you live in Vanuatu. They also have a residence program, which I feel a little suspicious of, where you can allegedly naturalize 10 years from now. But, this is a place where I'd be careful, because you don't want somewhere that's too disorganized, where you get caught up in their problems that they create. Because remember, I'm the goody two-shoes of the offshore business. I like to live an upstanding, ethical, and legal life. And I don't want to get swept into some country's rubbish. But you think in the South Pacific, they've got a hard time organizing a lot of stuff down. Okay, Fiji's a little bit better perhaps, but Solomon Islands is better. But in a place like Vanuatu, I just think it's like, hey, you do you. And that's what you're getting yourself into down there. So that's another place you can go. Eastern Europe, another place. You're seeing places like Serbia. As the European Union gets more heavy-handed, they pushed back on Albania. If you guys want to have a citizenship program, you're out. Don't plan on coming here. Now the EU is pushing back on Georgia for visa-free travel if they don't make some changes. The EU is pushing back on the Caribbean programs. It'll be interesting to see if the Caribbean passport programs are raising their price to satisfy the EU. Who told you that passport programs are going to go up in price for years? Oh, I did. And I think that places in Eastern Europe, there's a culture of don't tell me what to do. And with that, a begrudging, and I won't tell you what to do. And that's why I've said, go there. We've had a number of clients over the last couple of years that have gone to Serbia, gone to Montenegro. A couple of speakers for this year's Nomad Capitalist Live were in Albania when they interviewed me, and they're loving it. They're like, oh my God, you can just feel the freedom. So that region, you can feel more freedom. It's not perfect, but it is a more free existence. And I think that's in part because the people are just like, hey, don't tell us what to do. Oh, yeah, Western Europe. Yeah, we know what we're saying. You look at the president of Serbia. You don't have to agree with him on everything, but, they go and interview him from the UK news or the German news, and they really get on his case, and he pushes back. He's like, do you ask these questions to Angela Merkel, who's obviously gone now, or any of these Western politicians? And the answer is no, they don't. They get really upset with him because he's like, listen, we do things our way. And that's the message I want to get across. I think this almost feels like people get a guilty conscience about this. Like, why shouldn't Serbia run its country the way Serbia wants to run its country? Because, okay, forget about the government even. Forget what they do. You can level all kinds of accusations. Set that aside. The people are the people. And that's what's going to drive things forward. And I don't think they're going to stand for some of this stuff. I've said that for years. And I think the government in that case knows it. I think in some of this stuff, they probably agree. We want to beat to our own drum. You're not going to tell us what to do. And so, hey, I mean, listen, Hungary next door kind of does that, but they're in the European Union. Poland, to some extent, has tried to do that. Looks like they're kind of pivoting back in the last few months, but still in the European Union. I'm not saying don't have a European Union passport. I'm not saying don't spend time in an EU country or even live there. There's plenty of tax-friendly countries in the EU. There's plenty of nice places to live in the EU, if that's what you want. But wouldn't it be not a bad idea to have a residence permit or a citizenship in some Balkan country or some Caucasian country where they do things a little bit differently? So, if you're tired of all this talk from unelected bureaucrats of how they want to control your life, one thing I've noticed is, you know who loves to sponsor them? It's like the big four accounting firms, the big consulting firms. They eat it up. And so what Nomad Capitalist is we are the antidote to the big four firms who rarely give any specific advice, who rarely give you much of anything at all when you hire them to help you lower your taxes or get advice on something. I spoke to one of the wealthiest clients we've had. He said, it's just kind of a cobbled together report is what they gave me about where I can move. It's like, oh, you're a rich guy. You can move to Switzerland. It's like, gee, I never heard of Switzerland. Oh, thanks, guys. And he invited me over and he said, hey, you seem like you know some places that most people don't talk about. Where are the places off the beaten path that I can go to that I'll be covered? And that's what we do. We help clients who have $1 million or more in liquid assets or who have a high income figure out how to legally lower your taxes if you're willing to move, how to offshore your company, protect your assets overseas, whether it's with bank accounts, trusts, whatever it is. All has to be done legally. All has to be done to where across multiple jurisdictions it works. Getting second citizenships, getting second residence permits. This is the kind of stuff you want to do if you want to protect yourself. Because if all your bank accounts and your only passport and everything you have is in one place, where are you going to go? And if you had the chance, wouldn't you want to not be that historical character that goes to a new country with $73 in his pocket and has to start over with only the wits that he has? Wouldn't it be nice to have something waiting for you? I'm not saying, let me be very clear. We're not talking about hiding your money. If you're an American, for example, there are forms to be filed declaring foreign bank accounts, companies, trusts, etc. People we work with are going to tell you to do that all the time. We will not tolerate any deviance from that. You got to be on the up and up. But if you can legally move some money, if you can legally have a second passport, there's a few countries you're not allowed to be a dual citizen. Okay, get a residence permit instead and wait perhaps for that law to change, and then you can naturalize. But if you're allowed to have dual citizenship, you can generally have multiple citizenship, get a couple second passports. Do it legally. Don't get this Mexico, they do it in 14 days and they punch your name in the system that you see from some TikTokers. Don't do that. But do it legitimately. We help people figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. We spend a lot of time researching this stuff. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. Couple more places. And these are not specific geographically, but these are kind of cultural, mindset. Anywhere where people have known some oppression. What do a lot of these Western countries that are like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Take away all of our freedoms. What do they have in common? I would say generally they've had it too good for too long, and you've kind of disconnected what got us here from the people running the show. I've told you many, many times now, Gen Z, 30%. Put cameras inside the house in case someone's abusing their spouse. Hey, invade our freedoms the rest of the time for the small percentage of people, I would hope, who are doing that. Hey, who needs freedom? Yeah, they're kind of disconnected from what made the country successful in the first place. So when you go where people know oppression, I like underdog countries because they get this. They're like, hey, we know where we came from. there are a few Western countries that still have somewhat of that underdog mindset. And so somebody made the comment, if the elite 1% of the world took control, 99% of the population would likely resist. How would they deal with that? How successful were the Russian and the French aristocracy at staying alive or at liberty during the revolutions that tore their countries apart? The question is, if you get Gen Z, 30% say, put a camera in my bathroom at home to make sure I'm not, roughing up my girlfriend, I don't think they're going to be part of the 99% pushing back. So anywhere where they've known oppression, where they've seen, hey, you know what? I know where this is going. That's where you want to go. And so just look at look at the history of my lifetime. I'll be 40 this year. And look at the places that in your lifetime have had it bad. It's not an entirely perfect indicator, but I'm not looking for you to find one other place to go. This is not buying a summer home and you're going to be married to the new place. You want to have not a nomadic travel mindset, that you're always traveling, but you want to have the mindset of, if you are in an abusive relationship, you're going to go. So if you live in your country now, you live there for as long as you want until it gets abusive, and then you should leave. Now, people keep saying, when it gets bad enough, I'll leave. It's gotten progressively bad this entire century. Like if you're hanging on to that, with a claw, when it gets bad enough, I'll leave, you probably would have triggered bad enough a number of times in the last 20 years. But okay, hang out until you feel like it's an abusive relationship and then go. Well, what if I go to the next place and then 27 years later, then you leave again? Like, hey, what if I marry, an abusive person? You should probably leave. What if the next person I marry? You should probably leave again. Like, don't be in abusive relationships. And I say that with love. Don't be in abusive relationships, including with your country. And if you go to the next one and you pick that one wrong, okay. So listen, it's like have a couple you can pick from and then you're more covered. The fifth place, again, more the mindset basis is countries that are cooperating diplomatically with China, which I go back to the Africa point. I get it. A lot of people who watch don't like China. But listen, I don't know China. Okay, I don't know China. I don't know Xi Jinping. I don't know any of these people. But what I'm telling you is these are places where they're bucking the trend. Because you've had, since the fall of the Soviet Union, you've kind of had this, okay, Russia's kind of there. But it's kind of like, yeah, the U.S. is like the big superpower. All right, the EU does some things and Russia does some things. Now China's coming up as a superpower. But the U.S. kind of had its own turf for a while, and that's why I think they've gone pretty crazy on some of the sanctions. There's some bad people in the world. There's some bad countries and bad state actors in the world. Is it 4x'd since the turn of the century? They've 4x'd the sanctions. And so I think that for these countries who are like, you know what? Yeah, we don't get anything from you. China's given us something. We're going with them. That's almost, and it's becoming less and less so every day, it's almost kind of an act of revolt. Because I think that the U.S. government has this view that everyone has to go with this. Nigel Farage is speaking at Nomad Capitalist Live. I interviewed him 2 years ago, and I don't know that we entirely agree with this. I said, why should all these countries that, the Commonwealth, why should they stick with the UK? You see a few of the Caribbean ones kind of doing a little bit more business with China. He's like, well, we have shared values. And I don't know that that's how the U.S. and UK governments look at it. I can speak more for the U.S., where I think they're like, yeah, we just want people to vote with us and serve us and serve our needs. And for me, that's why, and I'm not saying this is, I'm the Nomad Capitalist. I'm not some bleeding heart liberal. I'm not some communist by any means. But when Trump said America first, I said to myself, do other countries get to put themselves first? And I ultimately left the U.S. and gave up my citizenship because I felt like being a guy who lives overseas in a world where everyone should put the U.S. first, and if you diplomatically choose to work with China, you're thumbing your nose to the U.S. and you're kind of like an enemy that we should maybe go and screw with. I don't agree with that, and I think that same kind of attitude probably goes to citizens who live in other countries that aren't legally aren't paying taxes in the U.S. And so I think just a country that has some kind of rebellion against this kind of unipolar system. We're going to a multipolar world. We're there. Some of these places could end up being not worth that much, but if you have a portfolio of different flags planted around the world, you're going to be prepared that if some of these places do become the next South Korea, the next Singapore, even the next Georgia, which did pretty well. A lot of countries have come up. They may not be perfect. They may not be at Singapore level yet, but they're better than where they were. If these places keep moving in the right direction, I think you'll see a different mindset there. People are going to scoff at it, but if you want to change the things in your life, you've got to change the things around you. You can't move from the United States to Italy, two Western countries that are very much connected, and say, why haven't things changed? You have to look at places that are different. And we'd be happy to help you figure out how that works in a very legal way.